Everyone in the courtroom thought it was just another trial. But when Denzel Washington walked in, chained and silent, even the reporters couldn't believe it. The judge, Amy Coney Barrett herself. Cold. Calculated. But what no one knew, what she didn't know, was that Denzel had been planning for this moment for years. He wasn't the one on trial, she was. What did he know that made a Supreme Court judge panic? And why did she try to shut him up before he could speak? The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., was packed to the walls. Cameras rolled from every angle, and whispers echoed like waves through the halls. But the room went silent the moment they led Denzel Washington through the double doors. Shackled at the wrists. Dressed in prison beige. It was the kind of image the media loved, but no one dared speak out loud what they were all thinking. Why was he here? The answer came cold and sharp from behind the bench. Judge Amy Coney Barrett didn't look at him. Not once. She flipped through her case file like it was beneath her. The United States versus Denzel Hayes Washington Jr., she said, voice like ice. On charges of obstruction of justice, unauthorized access to classified material, and attempted coercion of a federal official. The room gasped. It didn't make sense. Denzel wasn't a criminal. He was a national hero, an actor, a man who'd turned his fame into something more. He'd been working quietly with community leaders, investigating corruption in places the press was too scared to touch. Yet here he was, accused of crimes that sounded like something from a spy movie. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted Denzel as a man who crossed the line, who dug too deep into matters that weren't his business. But it wasn't just about what he did, it was about who he threatened. And everyone knew it. Judge Barrett's face never changed. She struck down his first objection without pause. When his lawyer tried to present a preliminary defense, she interrupted with a warning. Keep it clean or I'll hold you in contempt. Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse, it was tired. As if she'd already decided the outcome. As if this trial was just a formality. Something about her tone unsettled the room. This wasn't justice. It was performance. And Denzel. He didn't say a word. He sat still, calm, like a man watching a storm he knew was coming. The jurors were chosen fast. Too fast. Mostly older. Mostly white. No one asked the obvious questions. No one looked deeper. Denzel's team was blocked from submitting key evidence. His motions were delayed, and when they did arrive, Judge Barrett dismissed them with vague words like insufficient or untimely. It was clear, this was a setup. A show trial. And the worst part. Denzel knew it. But he didn't panic. He watched. He waited. He was studying something, someone. The cameras caught it for a second. A flash in his eyes when Barrett denied another motion. It wasn't fear. It was strategy. As the day ended, Barrett gave a closing warning. This court will not tolerate theatrics. Any further disruption will result in immediate sanctions. Her gavel fell like a threat. But as Denzel stood to be taken away, he looked up at her for the first time. And he smiled. It wasn't a smirk. It was the smile of a man who knew something. Something dangerous. Something that might turn this whole trial upside down. And for a moment, just a moment, you could see a flicker in Barrett's eyes. Fear. Doubt. She blinked it away. But the game had already started. And Denzel wasn't playing to win. He was playing to expose. Years before that courtroom day, Denzel Washington was standing on the biggest stages in Hollywood. Oscars, interviews, magazine covers, he had it all. But something shifted after a visit to his hometown. He was walking through a neighborhood he remembered as loud and full of life, now silent, shuttered, and heavy with pain. A young boy ran up to him, no older than 10, holding a folder full of documents. "My dad said to give you this before he disappeared," the boy whispered. Denzel looked down. Inside were sealed files, court transcripts, bank records, and names. Names of judges. Names of police chiefs. Names of men who played golf with lawmakers and were paid by private prison contractors to keep cells full. It was a web. And somehow, that little boy's father had gotten his hands on the blueprint. At first, Denzel tried to hand it off. He called reporters. Most hung up. One told him to never call again. Another warned him, "This stuff will ruin you." But it wasn't the threats that got to him, it was the silence. The way nobody wanted to know the truth. So Denzel did what he knew how to do. He performed. Not on camera, but in meetings, speeches, and closed-door sessions. He started funding programs to fight wrongful convictions. Quietly, he hired investigators to verify the files. What they found was sickening. Court cases rewritten. Black men given longer sentences for the same crimes as white men. Private prison donations funneled to PACs connected to state and federal judges. And worse, connections to figures high up in the federal system. Not just corruption, systematic oppression, covered by law. Denzel's work started to get noticed. Not by the press, but by people in power. He was invited to a quiet dinner with a retired senator who told him, off the record, "There are people watching you now. What you're poking at isn't a loose thread. It's the fabric." Denzel nodded but didn't stop. He found a whistleblower, someone from inside the office of the Inspector General, who confirmed it all. Judge Amy Coney Barrett's name didn't appear directly, but one document showed her signature blocking an internal review tied to a case that led to the wrongful conviction of 13 black men. That case helped a private prison company secure federal expansion funding. The company's board. It included Barrett's brother-in-law. Denzel didn't go to the media. He went deeper underground. He knew exposing this wasn't about headlines. It was about timing. He built a small team. Lawyers, former agents, a tech guy from MIT. They called themselves the Echo. Their goal was simple: get the truth to light, but only when it would do the most damage. For over a year, they followed the money, the contracts, the backdoor deals. And then someone flipped. A mid-level DOJ clerk leaked an internal memo about a containment strategy. The strategy wasn't about foreign threats. It was about Denzel. His name was listed under Domestic Disruption Tier 2. It was official. The government saw him as a threat. Not because he lied, but because he told the truth too well. Then came the leak. A member of the Echo tried to send part of the findings to a senator's office. But the message was intercepted. Within days, federal agents raided a non-profit linked to Denzel's name. The media played along, running stories about illegal data handling and political stunts. Denzel was never arrested. Not then. But his name was dragged through the mud. He lost funding. Events were cancelled. Doors that once opened wide slammed shut. But still, he didn't back down. He gave a speech at Howard University that wasn't broadcast but was recorded by a student and went viral. In it, he said, "I am not afraid of the truth, and I'm not afraid of the price for speaking it. But ask yourselves, who's afraid of me?" That's when the trap was set. A few weeks later, he was invited to speak at a private conference for social justice leaders. It was a setup. The room was filled with planted agents. A flash drive he brought, loaded with harmless notes, was switched with one full of classified documents Denzel had never seen. When he was arrested, they claimed he had tried to use those files to blackmail a sitting judge. That judge. Amy Coney Barrett. The headlines were brutal. Actor turned activist caught in blackmail plot. Denzel Washington, hero or hypocrite. They cuffed him outside a school he helped build. And from that moment, everything changed. But Denzel wasn't shocked. He looked right into the cameras and said one thing before they pushed his head into the car. "Tell her, I'm ready." The courtroom was colder on the second day. Not in temperature, but in tone. The press was packed in tighter, and the guards stood more alert. There were extra security checks. Every phone was scanned twice. Something had shifted. Judge Amy Coney Barrett walked in without a robe, in a sharp navy suit. The message was clear: she was in charge, and she didn't need tradition to prove it. As she sat down, Denzel was brought in through a side door. This time, no chains. But his posture was the same. Straight. Calm. Ready. He nodded to the jury box. A few jurors avoided his gaze. Others stared blankly. It wasn't fear. It was discomfort. Like they knew they weren't here for justice but didn't want to admit it out loud. The prosecution opened with a dramatic slideshow. Emails, bank logs, surveillance photos, all connected to that flash drive Denzel supposedly carried into the conference. They claimed he had acquired and weaponized data to pressure judicial officials. But when Denzel's lawyer asked to cross-check the digital signatures, Judge Barrett shut it down. "The chain of evidence is sufficient," she said. "No debate allowed." Next, they brought in a surprise witness, a tech specialist from Homeland Security, who claimed he traced the files directly to Denzel's private server. But when questioned on how the server was accessed, the witness got vague. The room picked up on it. Something was off. Things got worse fast. Key pieces of Denzel's evidence, video logs, emails, and even travel records, were reported as unavailable. The backup drives had been seized weeks earlier in a raid. When Denzel's team tried to introduce testimony from his private investigator, Barrett ruled it non-essential. It was like watching a house being built on sand. Everything solid kept disappearing. Every brick of truth replaced with smoke. But Denzel didn't break. He leaned back in his chair, watching. He was learning the rhythm of the courtroom, the body language, the way Barrett tilted her head slightly when she was about to lie. He saw it all. He was biding his time. During recess, something strange happened. A junior clerk passed a note to Barrett. She read it, then stood up and walked out without a word. Cameras followed her out into the hallway. A reporter tried to ask a question, but she ignored it. Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor asked for a sealed session. Barrett returned minutes later, eyes sharper, more guarded. Whatever the note said, it shook her. The next witness was an FBI agent who had been assigned to monitor Denzel's non-profit years earlier. He testified that there were clear signs of extremist sympathies. But when asked to define what that meant, he simply replied, "Anti-institutional language." Denzel raised an eyebrow. He didn't have to say a word. The audience knew what that meant. He questioned power. And now, they called that a crime. When Denzel's lawyer tried to introduce a sworn affidavit from a DOJ whistleblower, Barrett paused for a long time. Everyone held their breath. She looked at the document. Her fingers tightened. Then she said, "This document is inadmissible. It does not meet the authentication standard required by federal statute." It was a lie. Everyone knew it. The defense attorney looked ready to explode, but Denzel touched his arm. "Let it go," he said softly. That was the moment the tide began to turn, but not in the way anyone expected. The jury watched Denzel take control, not with power, but with grace. He wasn't fighting them. He was showing them what was being hidden. The prosecutor made his next move big. He pulled out a sealed envelope and walked it to the bench. "We have new classified material," he said. "It links the defendant to foreign actors." Barrett looked at him, then at Denzel. The room froze. Denzel leaned forward. "I'd like to see that material, Your Honor," he said. Barrett shook her head. "You do not have clearance to view classified data." His lawyer objected. Barrett overruled. "The content will be summarized by the prosecution." And just like that, Denzel was being accused of something he couldn't even read. It wasn't justice. It was shadow theater. That night, outside the courthouse, protests began. Peaceful, but loud. People held signs with phrases like "Truth matters" and "We see you, Denzel." The media barely covered it. But inside, the courtroom buzzed with pressure. Barrett tightened the leash. No phones. No note passing. She ordered Denzel's team to stop communicating with the press. "This court does not answer to public opinion," she said. The next morning, Denzel came in with a change in demeanor. Not cold. Not afraid. But charged. Like he had made a decision. He whispered to his lawyer. The lawyer shook his head. Denzel nodded once, then stood. "Your Honor," he said clearly. "I am terminating counsel and will represent myself moving forward." Gasps echoed. His lawyer tried to argue. Barrett narrowed her eyes. "This is highly irregular," she said. "Are you certain?" Denzel didn't blink. "Absolutely." She paused. "Then so be it. You now carry your own fate." Denzel turned to face the jury, calm, poised, eyes locked on every face. "Good," he said. "Because now, the truth speaks for itself." The air inside the courtroom changed the second Denzel took over. No longer buffered by a legal team, no longer shielded by polished motions or technical objections, he stood alone. Just a man in a grey suit, facing the full weight of the justice system with nothing but his voice. Judge Barrett looked down at him with a flicker of something she hadn't shown before, maybe curiosity, maybe concern. Either way, the shift was real. Denzel's first move wasn't what anyone expected. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He walked slowly to the center of the courtroom and looked directly at the jury. "You've heard their story," he said, pointing to the prosecution table. "Now you'll hear mine. Not from a lawyer. From me. Because I lived it." The first thing he did was call his own witness. The prosecution objected, but he had filed it overnight. Barrett looked at the paperwork. She didn't want to allow it. Her fingers tapped the bench. "Proceed," she finally muttered. The doors opened and in walked an older man with a limp. He was a former FBI agent, retired early, no longer under oath to the Bureau. He swore in, then sat down. Denzel walked up to him and asked just one question. "Did you ever see anything in your career that made you question who we were protecting?" The man nodded. Then he told a story about being ordered to drop investigations into private contractors. One of the names mentioned in those reports. The same corporation linked to Barrett's family. The courtroom held its breath. Denzel didn't stop there. He pulled out a small tablet and connected it to the courtroom's main screen. Judge Barrett leaned forward, visibly tense. A series of files appeared, emails, financial ledgers, and redacted government memos. "These documents were not stolen," Denzel said. "They were sent to me by people who believe the law should serve everyone, not just the few at the top." Barrett tried to interrupt. "You are not cleared to share classified information in open court." Denzel smiled. "These were declassified 6 days ago. Legally released under FOIA. Would you like to verify that?" She said nothing. The jury watched as Denzel walked them through a web of connections: judges, prison contracts, campaign money, and silenced watchdogs. He wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing a machine. By the third hour, tension rippled through the walls. The bailiffs shifted uncomfortably. Reporters furiously scribbled notes. The prosecution looked panicked. They tried to object, but every time Denzel countered with paperwork, evidence, and calm words. He didn't speak like a victim. He spoke like a teacher. A man offering the jury not just facts, but truth wrapped in patience. "They want you to believe I'm a criminal," he said, "because I uncovered crimes they can't admit to." Then he dropped the biggest bombshell yet. A wire transfer. A massive sum of money, moved from an anonymous PAC into a foundation directly connected to Barrett's brother-in-law. The date. 1 week before the wrongful convictions that launched a new prison construction deal. The courtroom fell silent. Barrett slammed her gavel. "This line of questioning is inappropriate." But it was too late. The jury had seen the document. Denzel turned to her. "Inappropriate or inconvenient?" She froze. Her face didn't move, but her eyes gave her away. Denzel walked back to his table and stood still. Then he said the unthinkable. "I am filing a motion to subpoena the court itself." The prosecution erupted. "That's not how this works." Barrett stood up. "Enough," she shouted. Her voice cracked. The first real crack in her wall. "You will not turn this into a circus." Denzel looked around. "No circus here, Your Honor. Just truth. And truth makes noise." The next morning, the courtroom was different again. Word had spread. More protesters outside. More press. People who hadn't paid attention before were now glued to every moment. Denzel arrived early, flanked by marshals, still under tight watch. Barrett was already at the bench, eyes heavy, jaw tight. She knew what was coming. Denzel had filed another motion. This one wasn't for evidence. It was for testimony, from a former DOJ official who had resigned under mysterious circumstances. Barrett stalled. The witness is not on the approved list. Denzel slid a document forward. They're waiting outside. The court can subpoena on the spot. Barrett paused. A full 10 seconds of silence passed. Then she whispered, "Bring them in." The doors opened. A woman in her 40s walked in with steady steps. She looked right at Barrett. The tension was so thick, it was hard to breathe. She took the stand and was sworn in. Then she told the story of how she was pressured to bury reports linking private prison firms to judicial lobbying. She admitted that she had been offered a promotion if she looked the other way. When asked who pressured her, she said the name out loud. Not Barrett, but someone in Barrett's family. It was a technical detail. But it was enough. Enough to show bias. Enough to paint a shadow over everything Barrett had ruled on. Enough to make the jury lean forward in their seats. Denzel didn't gloat. He didn't grin. He walked back to the jury and said something simple. "I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to look." He paused. "Look at what's been done in your name. Look at who gets punished. Look at who gets protected." Then he looked at Barrett. "And ask why." The room was still. Even the court clerk seemed frozen. Barrett reached for her gavel, but her hand hesitated. Just for a moment. And in that moment, Denzel had won something bigger than the case. He had taken control of the truth. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension the next morning. The jury looked tired but alert, the press had doubled, and every camera was pointed at the bench. But the real focus was on Judge Barrett. Something in her face had changed overnight. The tight control she had maintained since the start of the trial now looked like strain. She flipped through her papers too quickly, tapped her pen too often, and didn't meet Denzel's eyes once. It was clear now that something deeper was unraveling. Denzel stood calmly at his table, a stack of papers before him and a quiet fire behind his eyes. He had been waiting for this day, the moment when the system could no longer hide what it protected. The twist began not with a speech, but a single photo. Denzel displayed it on the screen. A smiling Judge Barrett at a charity gala 10 years ago. Nothing unusual. Until he zoomed in. Standing next to her was a man in a suit holding a glass of champagne. Denzel clicked again, bringing up a company document. The man in the photo was listed as a founding board member of a private prison corporation, one that had grown rapidly during Barrett's federal rise. Denzel explained calmly that this man, identified as her brother-in-law in public records, was connected to several lobbying deals that went under the radar. No direct crimes. But patterns. Patterns of money, of influence, of power-shifting hands in quiet backrooms while lives were destroyed in open courtrooms. Barrett tried to cut in. "This is circumstantial. Irrelevant to the case at hand." But Denzel didn't stop. He wasn't accusing her yet. He was laying foundation. He showed how that same corporation had received federal grants after a wave of arrests in states where judges with shared political interests sat on the bench. One of the internal memos linked to those grants had Barrett's initials, ACB, at the bottom, listed as a consultant before her judicial appointment. The courtroom gasped. Barrett's face went blank. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She reached for her gavel, but didn't strike it. Denzel pulled out a flash drive. "May I enter this into evidence?" Barrett said nothing. The court clerk looked to her. She nodded once, tight and sharp. The contents of the drive were played on screen, audio recordings from internal strategy calls at the corporation. One voice in particular stood out. Calm, stern, articulate. It was the man from the photo. He said clearly, "As long as Barrett sits, our expansion is safe." The jury froze. The prosecution objected violently. "This is unauthorized surveillance." Denzel countered. The recordings were provided legally by a whistleblower under state law. Fully authenticated. Barrett stood, visibly rattled. "We will take a recess." But the jury had already heard it. And they wouldn't forget it. The twist didn't end there. During the break, the courthouse buzzed with rumors. A senator was on his way. The Department of Justice had been briefed. But inside the judge's chambers, something else was happening. A clerk, young, nervous, slipped a folder under the door of Denzel's assistant. Inside were sealed emails. Internal memos from Barrett's early days as a legal advisor, showing she had reviewed and approved financial programs tied to private detention initiatives. Not illegal, but undeniably connected. When court resumed, Denzel addressed the jury, holding the folder. "This isn't just about me. This is about how easily justice bends when power pushes hard enough." Barrett looked pale. She interrupted. "Mr. Washington, I remind you, this trial is not about me." Denzel turned to her. "Then why does your name keep showing up in the evidence?" The room went silent again. Barrett stood and recessed the court early. As she walked out, her hand trembled. That night, news leaked that federal watchdog groups had begun inquiries into her past rulings. The Senate Judiciary Committee had requested documents. It was spreading now, faster than anyone expected. The next day, Barrett returned to the bench wearing her robe again, as if to restore the order that had already slipped. Her voice was firm, but the edge was gone. She tried to proceed with witness testimony, but Denzel refused. "I'd like to call one last witness. Myself." The jury leaned in. Denzel walked to the center of the room. "I never wanted this trial," he said. "I wanted the truth. I wanted someone in power to say, 'This isn't right.' But I realized no one would. Because they were all too connected." He paused, then added, "Even you, Judge Barrett." Her jaw clenched. "That's enough." But Denzel continued. "You tried to silence me. Not because I lied, but because I saw the truth behind your silence. The truth that power protects itself, even if it means jailing the ones who speak up." The courtroom was completely still. Even the guards didn't move. Denzel ended his speech with one final line. "So now, I ask you, the jury, will you protect the system, or will you protect justice?" No one spoke for a long time. Barrett stood and recessed court once more. But the damage was done. Her hands shook as she left. The mask had cracked. And behind it wasn't a judge. It was a woman standing at the edge of exposure, one step away from everything falling apart. The courthouse steps were flooded with voices before the final day of the trial even began. Protesters held signs, reporters shouted into microphones, and vans from major networks circled the block like sharks. Inside, it was dead quiet. The air felt thick, like everyone could sense the end coming, but no one knew how it would fall. Judge Barrett entered the courtroom slower than usual, her steps controlled but heavy. She didn't look at the gallery, not at the jury, not even at Denzel. Her eyes were locked forward, staring at nothing. For the first time, the woman who had once ruled with an iron tongue looked uncertain. The court clerk called the session to order, and Denzel stood, calm as always, as if he were simply walking into another scene, another set. But this wasn't a script. It was real. Every second of it. He didn't offer new evidence. He didn't call another witness. He just walked to the front and spoke. "The facts are here. You've seen them. You've heard them. You've felt the weight of every truth that was dragged into this room. Now I want you to ask yourselves one thing. If this had been anyone else, someone without cameras, without a name, how would this trial have gone? Would they have even made it this far?" Silence. No one moved. "You're not just deciding on my guilt. You're deciding on hers. On what this court allows. On what it protects." He turned toward Barrett. "I'm not afraid of a sentence. But I won't leave this room without finishing what I came here to do." Just as he sat down, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A man in a dark suit, holding a federal badge, stepped in. He whispered to the clerk, who stood and handed a note to Barrett. Her hands shook. She read it, paused, then closed her eyes. "This court is now in recess," she said. But it was too late. The man stepped forward and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "By order of the Justice Department, Judge Amy Coney Barrett is now under investigation for judicial misconduct and conflict of interest. Effective immediately, her role in this trial is suspended pending review." Gasps broke across the room like a wave. The bailiff looked frozen, unsure whether to move. Barrett sat still, her face drained of color, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, her gavel was out of reach, and someone else was calling the shots. The court was cleared. Chaos outside erupted into cheers. Reporters ran toward the steps. Inside, Denzel sat alone at his table, silent, processing what just happened. A new judge was assigned, one with no known ties to the corporations under scrutiny. Within hours, the case was reviewed, the key evidence admitted, and the jury sent to deliberate. It didn't take long. 45 minutes later, the foreman returned with the verdict. Not guilty on all counts. Denzel didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He simply closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. Justice hadn't been handed to him. He had dragged it, brick by brick, out of the shadows and into the light. But the story didn't end with the verdict. Outside, the press swarmed him, shouting questions, flashing lights, calling his name. He walked straight through them without a word. Down the steps. Into the crowd. And disappeared. He didn't give interviews. He didn't hold a press conference. He let the silence speak. Let the country ask the questions they should have asked long ago. In the days that followed, headlines exploded. Judge Barrett under fire. Supreme Court integrity in question. Hearings were scheduled. Her past rulings were reviewed. And behind closed doors, deals started to crumble. Corporations pulled back funding. Names started disappearing from boards. Whispers of more resignations filled the air. Denzel returned to the non-profit quietly. No fanfare. Just work. Just focus. He released a short statement online. I didn't do this for me. I did this because silence is too expensive. And justice shouldn't be a luxury. It went viral in minutes. But he didn't stick around to watch the numbers. He was already planning the next move, the next fight. Because while the courtroom battle was over, the war for truth was far from done. And he knew, somewhere out there, another case was already being buried, another truth was already being twisted. But this time, those in power would think twice. In a quiet moment weeks later, someone asked him, "Do you feel like you won?" Denzel paused, then said, "This wasn't about winning. It was about making sure the next person doesn't have to fight this hard to be heard." And with that, he walked off, coat over his shoulder, disappearing into the city like a man who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to do.